Good afternoon to those in the UK, good evening to those in Japan, and a warm welcome back to this quarterly Japan Society webinar, hosted rather jointly with Asia Society Tokyo. I am Bill Emmett, and until the end of last month, I had the honor of chairing the Japan Society for a wonderful 6-year term, which in accordance with all the best principles of corporate governance has just come to an end, and I've just handed over to the Right Honourable Greg Clark, who will do, of course, a wonderful job in that role. However, as now honorary vice chairman, I will continue to host these webinars, so I can wish you all a very happy new year of the snake, in which the Japan Society has changed its chairing skin, but not the skin of these Japan macro salons. As our regular attendees know, every quarter in these salons, I am joined by our good friend Jesper Koll, well known as a, quote, Japan optimist, as he describes himself, but also for more than 3 decades, one of the highest rated economists and strategists in Tokyo. Jesper has worked with the best, including JP Morgan and Merrill Lynch, and is now an expert director at the Monex Group, as well as a board director at the Okinawa Institute for Science and Technology, and of course, an advisor to us all. Today, as befits the new year, we will discuss some of the issues that will shape Japan's prospects, including what Jesper in his annual article calls Japan surprises. Not, I would emphasize, predictions, but rather possibilities that we should think about for how our expectations for 2025 could potentially be proven wrong. One of those expectations is undoubtedly founded on geopolitics, and the fact that the 47th president of Japan's closest ally, the United States, will be inaugurated in 11 days' time. So I'm delighted that as our special guest today, we will welcome a friend and expert on geopolitics, Professor Ken Jimbo, who combines roles as Professor of International Relations at Keio University and as Managing Director for Programs at what is now Japan's major international think tank, the Institute for Geoeconomics at the International House of Japan, formerly known as the Asia-Pacific Initiative. Ken has done a ton of work on defense, security, the US-Japan relationship, and in particular, the Asian regional security scene. Ken will join us in about 15 minutes' time. But first, as usual, I will begin by reviewing recent economic trends with Jesper. Throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit questions at any time using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and vote for other people's questions if you want to bring them more quickly to my attention. So, Jesper, Happy New Year to you, and you're full of surprises as always. But Japan is, as with your number one potential surprise, is one of the few countries that actually has inflation accelerating rather than slowing down. But it doesn't have the Bank of Japan, the central bank, aggressively raising interest rates to do with that. You've talked about the potential for an inflation spiral. I saw our friends at Fast Retailing saying that they were giving quite big wage rises yesterday. How do you see the inflation prospects this year for Japan? And therefore, let's immediately discuss monetary policy.
Yeah, and Bill, I think you put your finger on the pulse here. There are a key issue, is the reality of the dynamics of inflation actually beginning to change. It's very clear that initially we had what is called cost push inflation. You had a weakening of the yen. You had an increase in global food and energy prices, and that obviously fed its way into bad inflation in Japan, actually squeezing the purchasing power of Mr. and Mrs. Watanabe. Over the last 6-7 months, it is very clear that the virtuous cycle that Japan is experiencing in the corporate world, where you're seeing, record corporate profitability, followed by record business investment expenditure. We've got 3 years now of business expenditure leading the domestic economic expansion. And it's a combination of onshoring, friendshoring, as well as the service sector in particular, upgrading their capital stock So you find a lot of digitalization that actually is going on. But with the corporate sector being in the virtuous cycle, this now combining with a very, very acute labor shortage. I mean, it's very clear, every CEO that I speak to, the number one, number two, number three issue is the reality of being unable to procure labor. And as a result of that, you actually find that the wage dynamics in Japan is changing very, very quickly, much, much more quickly, than the aggregate numbers led on. The aggregate numbers, obviously, including the small and medium-sized, mostly family-owned enterprises from the regional economies. But if you look at the Keidanren member companies, so as it were, the Fortune 500 club of Japan, you actually find that now all companies are hiring more people mid-career than they hire at the graduate intake, which has never happened before.
Really, more mid-career than that is actually, if I may interrupt, that is actually remarkable. So
Oh,
more
it is. I mean, this idea that, oh my God, the labor market in Japan is so rigid, which obviously was very true over the last 30 years. There's no question about it. The dynamics has changed dramatically. As I said, liquidity, if you look at turnover, dramatic increases there. And then Bill, Recruit, the employment agency, they actually do wonderful data now, which finds that last year of the people who switched jobs, you find that on average, the pay increase was around 18%. And very interesting, for the people in their 20s, the average pay increase was actually more than 40% when you switch jobs. So, you've got the aggregate data still distorted by the baby boom generation moving towards retirement. That's obviously disinflationary, which is fine. But at the front end of the age curve, so people in their 20s and 30s, very, very significant increase in pay, very significant increase in the mobility of labor. And ironically, Bill, the new generation of CEOs in Japan actually moving towards pay for performance rather than pay by seniority. So I think the number one issue, to bring it back to the point, is that Japan's primary resource, which is human capital, which is labor, is in extremely tight supply. The market is actually responding to that. You've got higher pay. You've got, as a result of the increase in pay, you've got mobility of labor actually beginning to pick up. And it's, like you point out, it's stunning to see that the richest man in Japan, Mr. Yanai of fast retailing, starting the new year with saying, everybody in my company is going to get at least a double-digit pay increase. Now, that's significant. That's very significant. And I think, for the Bank of Japan, the risk is that, yes, they're being very cautious. Yes, they're being very academic about it. But the risk is that they're actually falling behind the curve, that it's a little bit of too little, too late, that is actually starting to come through.
Now, I suppose my first question we can ask, why are they that? But the second, actually what I'll ask first is, how much does this matter, do you think? Because
I think it does matter, Bill.
What you said is a virtuous cycle. This is what we've been waiting for in some ways to really happen as the metabolism changes.
Yeah, but this is the slight absurdity. I actually had this discussion with the governor, because you've got this absurdity that people like me in the financial markets, we are all gung-ho and very excited about the developments, whether it's corporate governance, whether it's profitability, whether it's investing for growth. All of these are great things that Japan will have a bright future and you're prepared to mobilize capital for it. But then you've got a Bank of Japan that is extremely cautious and says, ooh, the system isn't quite ready yet. We still can't normalize. Excuse me. We've got interest rates of 0.25% at the front end. That's nothing. Real interest rates, as you know, in Japan are massively negative because you've got 2.5% inflation already. And so I think why it matters for markets is the yen's depreciation. And actually, as a result of the yen's depreciation, the risk of this vicious form of inflation, of cost push inflation, continuing to reduce the purchasing power of particularly the pensioners in Japan. Yes, the young generation in Japan, thank you, is doing very well with very nice new job opportunities, higher pay, all of that is coming through for the younger generation. But the cost push inflation of the older generation. And Bill, let's not forget, one of the single biggest policy problems Japan has is that its pension system is not indexed to inflation.
Right.
As you know, pension increases, the payout for pensioners is adjusted by something that has an ingenious name. It's called the Macro Slide, which effectively is a committee of 9 people who decide, that the premium, that the pension payouts are going to be less. Let me be specific. Last year, you had inflation, of around 3%. But the pension payouts were increased by only 1.7%. So obviously, for the retirees, for the baby boom generation, this is a big pinch.
And so, Bank of Japan, back to Governor Ueda, your chum. So, if this was the Bundesbank, they would definitely be not late, right? So we have a German philosophy talking to a Japanese one when you meet, when you talk. How do you see the philosophy of the Bank of Japan in, if you like, trying to be seeing caution in the way that they do?
Yeah, and this is super interesting. And, amongst all the noise that we always get with monetary policy meetings, actually in December, the Bank of Japan published a very, very comprehensive report. It's called the Review of Monetary Policy from a Broad Perspective. Now, it's 220 pages, full of charts. But it was one of the first things that Governor Ueda actually did when he came into office. To really have a very thorough review of what actually happened with monetary policy over the last 25 years. And, this deals with all the top subjects of, the transmission mechanism of monetary easing, what was quantitative easing, what was the effect on the banking system, what was the effect on asset markets. This is a must read for anybody who looks at Japan right now. And, the conclusion in terms of what's relevant for today is that they are actually voicing a lot of concern over the stability of Japan's secondary banking system. The primary banking system, the big banks, obviously well capitalized, and they are, they've got reasonably good technology, they've got good risk management, and they can attract good people. But the secondary banking system, starting with the regional banks, but going all the way down to the shrinking banks, to the different trust corporations, there is no technology, there is no people, and frankly, there is no business model. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but obviously the regional banks, because of the demographic demise, particularly in the regions of Japan, they're actually starting to experience deposit flight.
Wow.
And as a result of that, what springs out from this very comprehensive review from the Bank of Japan is that there is actually some skeletons in the closet, that the higher interest costs for the secondary banking system, could actually lead to a potential destabilization of the overall system, which is very, very interesting. I'm exaggerating a little bit. I'm being a little bit Germanic. But obviously it's much more polite in the way it's written now. But anybody who reads this report walks away with these things, says, wow, not all is well. There is reasons to be cautious because the financial system, underneath the hood of the big 3 mega banks, beneath that, the system may actually not be that well capitalized and may not be that capable of actually dealing with higher interest rates. So it's a very interesting report.
That is interesting. I mean, this is the Bank of Japan's very own zombie sector. I mean, in effect,
Yeah.
yeah. We have our focus often on industrial and service zombies, but in other areas. But this is fascinating. That's so. Your expectation would be that they will remain behind the curve this year because for this reason.
I think that the risk is very, very high. Now, it gets compounded and more complicated by two factors. One is domestic and the other one is international. Because, of course, the Bank of Japan beginning to fall behind the curve means that the currency will be where you notice it. And you're seeing, obviously, the yen depreciating. And now, if Maganomics, if Mr. Trump has its way and boosts, introduces tariffs, I mean, most economists will tell you that that should mean that the dollar is going to become an even more stronger currency for the time being.
Yes.
So I think that internationally there is a risk, but then domestically in Japan, it's very interesting that Prime Minister Ishiba, increased fiscal spending yet again. We got another record supplementary budget. We got another record 30 trillion yen of government guarantees lending to zombie companies. So it sort of compounds the problem in the sense of neither monetary policy nor fiscal policy are actually normalizing.
Yes.
Because, you're looking at a Japanese economy that for all intents and purposes is at full employment. And for all intents and purposes is, in at least 2 years into a virtuous cycle of positive continued business investment. And as a result of that, you should have a normalized monetary and a normalized fiscal policy, but you're far from it because, you still have got massively negative real interest rates and you still have a running budget deficit, never mind the overall stock, a running budget deficit, of around 4% of GDP, which is quite incredible, right, for this state. So too little, too late. I'm always very optimistic, about Japan. And I think there's some great things, even over the last couple of weeks that have happened in the corporate side. When you look, for example, the Honda-Nissan merger, this idea of, getting rid of some of the excess capacity, even in the Japanese car sector, and, hopefully creating a national champion. This is fantastic news. When you look at the whole 7-Eleven, that takeover saga, which shows you that the market for corporate control is extremely liquid and very open now. Yes. Which is very, very interesting. So you've got a lot of good things happening, but at the macro policy side, both fiscal and monetary policy being way too stimulative for this stage in the cycle, I think is something that is going to lead, unfortunately, to further depreciation of the Japanese currency.
Well, that's a very good way to frame the way we have to think about this year, I think. That interplay between macro policy and corporate behavior. Now, I'm going to bring in Jimbo Sensei. Welcome, Ken, to the Japan Society. Jimbo Sensei is on a line from Singapore, where he's been attending a conference, normally based in Tokyo. And given that Jesper has mentioned that 5-letter word that is the 47th president of the United States coming in, but also the interplay between, if you like, macro policy and corporate behavior. I'm going to start by having the both of you comment on the other corporate story that was really with the 46th president, President Biden, which is the Nippon Steel, US Steel story. The Biden blocking the US Steel, the acquisition of US Steel by Nippon Steel on national security grounds, if you like, overruling or at least carrying forward the Committee for Foreign Investment in the US deliberations. This is in some ways quite shocking, but it's politically predictable. How do you, Ken, and then I'll come to you, Jesper, how do you see the ramifications of this deal, which was not a complete surprise, of course? How is it sending waves around Japan?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. It's been already been an exciting conversation. I rather want to be the audiences rather than getting into joining the conversation, but I'm very pleased to be here. Um, I think it is like a first time in many decades to see the emotional response by the president of the Nippon Steel, and together with Prime Minister Ishiba and some of the cabinet members, openly criticize the decision made by the United States, and also legally suing the president of the United States. And that's really the exceptional, I think, the transaction that has been taking place in the Japan-US economic relations. And I think it has some background stories because that there has been the consolidation of the Japan and the United States towards our adoption towards the economic security policy, which is try to achieve a couple of targets, which is to achieve the strategic resiliency by diversify our import source from over-relying any kind of materials and critical technologies from one sources to diversify the things and subsidizing the Japanese domestic, companies to cultivate its own productions systems, and then to achieve the so-called strategic indispensability by again securing our own materials to be as precious as possible for any countries to rely on Japanese products and materials, which is a very important aspects for being ourselves as a resilient economic situation. And that has to be shared among those so-called like-minded states for the friendshoring processes. And I think from the Japanese government, Nippon Steel perspective, the merger between the Nippon Steel and US Steel is perfectly in line with this story, which is the win-win solution for them that the US Steel production rate is now went down to like a 24th in the world. And by looking at the rankings of the production of the steels, it's been increasingly being dominated by the Chinese
Mm.
producers. So in order to secure the stable supply of the quality steels, it makes a perfect sense for the Nippon Steel and U Steel to get together, and even U.S. Steel executive members and the labor, communities are agreeing on these issues. So that and that now comes into all the politics in the United States, which creates a lot of like a nationalism, and then what they call the security concern towards the allies. And then some of those kind of election campaign promises and all things have created the different layer of the rejection of the Nippon Steel proposal, which I think creates a lot of like doubts among those Japanese, stakeholders who are in the process of, getting on board towards the very concept of the friend shoring. And so that's number one. At the same time, you can also find another stories like Masayoshi Son, promised to, spend a lot of money in the investment in preparation for the new like economic structure that under the Trump administration, he's tariffing not only towards China but also to every parts of the world. It also makes another rational sense for the Japanese companies to make more foreign direct investment towards the United States. So we are, I think, receiving a very confusing message from
Yeah.
the.
No, absolutely. As you say, it contradicts somewhat the notion that you need to attract investment to in. But Jesper, and then I'm going to bring in a question because there's been a question about this. Jesper.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, and Jimbo-san laid it out because look, Japan has accomplished over the last 6, 7 years exactly what the United States wants to do, which is that you've got resilient supply chains, that you've got diversification, that you've got the ability to produce the best steel that there is. And it's quite remarkable because it's sort of the end of the rational, in the sense of that, when we had trade wars in the past, in the 1980s, right? Yes, you had the threat of protectionism. But you had the come around where voluntary quotas adopted by Japanese car companies and massive amounts of technology transfer and investment in the United States to actually create jobs and to create some of the most efficient car factories in the world, the Japanese transplants in the United States of America. Now you've got this, no, it's just no. Everybody knows that now that the deal doesn't go through, they are probably U.S. Steel will probably have to lay off between 3,000 and 5,000 people. And it's completely absurd. Now, I just want to make one point very quickly, which is often forgotten. Nippon Steel is run by a gentleman called Mr. Hashimoto, who is a bilingual, bicultural engineer with a Harvard degree. His compensation is about $1 million. The gentleman who runs U.S. Steel, which is at this point, it's fair to say, a second or third rate steel company in the world, his annual compensation is $18 million. And when he retires, he's got a guaranteed parachute of $50 million. He's an accountant. He's not an engineer. So the point I'm trying to make is that actually we are living in an analog world. Yes, there's all this AI, virtual, artificial stuff going on, but the actual management of analog technologies, real engineering projects, the Japanese, particularly in the steel sector, are the best in the world. They are an ally of the United States. They were going to transfer technology and thereby actually make America great again. And now they're being snubbed. So wow.
Absolutely, it's a wow moment. I absolutely agree. Now, Jim Fink has put in a question here, which counts as maybe Japan surprise number 11. He asks, will Trump change his stance and facilitate the US Steel, Nippon Steel merger? That would be quite an extraordinary change around, but in some ways there's a logic behind it, as you have both said. What's your bet? Yes or no?
If Trump tried to, formulate his policy anything but Biden type of things, and yes. Biden decisions will be turnaround that he made a bad choice and I did the good choice for the U.S. economy, protecting the laborers, and also the steel maker will be stronger together with with Japan, and those kind of story will emerge. That's going to be the 180 degrees kind of, the change of the stories. But Trump initially said, right after, it's almost like a year ago that the Nippon Steel revealed their plan to merge with the U.S. Steel. But Trump immediately said that he's going to reject it.
Yes.
So that I don't think that that's going to happen as a case.
So he'd need something in return. It would need to be a transaction, Jesper. What would it?
So here I'm hopeful, and I actually hope that in the Trump administration, you've got in particular Treasury Secretary
Bessent.
Scott
Bessent.
Sorry.
Yes.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, is very well connected in Japan, knows Japan very well. And also Scott, the Treasury Secretary, is the incoming Treasury Secretary, knows how to deal with tough people because he had to work for Soros, for a long time. And so there is a win-win, which is if Nippon Steel ups a little bit its commitment to invest in the United States of America, building another factory, then Trump can turn this into a win, yes. Saying I've created 10,000 jobs, in the Rust Belt of the United States of America. So I'm still hopeful that, actually because of Trump's team, that reason is actually going to prevail.
Good. No, I would rather be with you there. That I think that there's a not insignificant possibility that this could happen, as you say, with certain extra elements added. But let me move away from America for a moment, because I think we should make sure to look at the perspective both from the point of view of Southeast Asia, where you're sitting, but also China, and Prime Minister Ishiba's policy towards both. Maybe we should start with Southeast Asia and then move on to relations with China. But since you're in Singapore and Prime Minister Ishiba is just been in Jakarta, I think I'm right in saying.
Yes, we just had a full day conference at the Yusuf Ishak Institute, which annually provides the poll of the Southeast Asia perceptions towards the world. And something striking happened last year was the poll result, which shows that who are the most reliable partner and who you are going to align with in the strategic decisions. And actually, China overtook United States last year, which made I think, a significant impact towards the perception of the Southeast Asia. And I think temporarily that's been heavily influenced by what's been going on in Middle East, especially in Gaza, especially that when you look at the perspectives of the Malaysian Prime Minister, for example, and also from Indonesia, which are Muslim-dominant countries, have been taking a very, I think, robust stance in offering compassion towards the Palestinians, and even some of those kind of sympathy towards the Hamas in the extreme sense. So that Southeast Asia sometimes takes quite the decisive stance on the religious and also the emotional issues are combined. And the Gaza really demonstrates that the scheme. And then the United States, support towards the Israel is the thing that really affected the last year's poll result. And then there has been I think, the constant disappointment towards the United States engagement in Southeast Asia. But as many of you know, that Southeast Asia wished to be the gravity space for the conference diplomacy. It is not, China, Japan, Korea who is providing the platform for the regional cooperation, but that is ASEAN. It's a Southeast Asia as a neutral actor who can engage the major actor to be involved. So that's why they call it ASEAN centrality. They wish to be, on the driver's seats. But on those kind of driver's seats, the United States is not paying the respect as much as what the Southeast Asia wish to have. And they knew about what would happen during the first Trump administration, but even during the Biden administration, the cabinet members and president didn't spend too much time in engaging Southeast Asia. That also really creates the leeway for China and other actors to come in. And then one of the striking, I think, the news that we have is now Indonesia is accepted as the full member of the BRICS, which is going to take place in Brazil this year. And then that Malaysia, Vietnam, for sure, and Laos and even Thailand are now applying to become the member of the BRICS. And you can say the BRICS is only a kind of multi-dimensional hedging strategy for Southeast Asia to create the more alternatives. But again, that really creates some kind of ideological attachment for like a non-Western alignments fits well to Southeast Asia, and you cannot really underestimate those kind of phenomena. And this is one of the reasons that the Prime Minister Ishiba wished to invest on the direction of the Southeast Asia by visiting to Indonesia, the gravity country in Southeast Asia, and the Malaysia, who is the chair country for ASEAN this year.
And Japan rather has really been the country within the US and Western alliance that has devoted a lot of attention to ASEAN, that is there on the ground, that is connecting on a regular basis, and in many ways is there as a partial compensation in what you do for what the Americans don't do. Now I know that you've been particularly active with the Philippines, and including helping them with direct aid for their Coast Guard service and others. Do you see this Japanese investment now increasing try to deal with that situation you just so brilliantly described?
Yeah, I think you can find the many layers of the ASEAN, and within ASEAN there are stark differences on the level of the distance between how you try to align yourself to the Western ideologies, and the Philippine Thai and have been the former allies with the United States, and Singapore provides the logistic base for the U.S. Naval deployments, and so it's a kind of practical alignment has been made to ensure the United States physical commitment in the region. That's the one of the face for the ASEAN. But on the other hand, they try to remain as ideologically neutral, not to be being vetoed by those bigger powers, either United States nor China. But in a sense, but if you look at the investment rates and the trade volumes, they are increasingly overshadowed by Chinese economic advancements in the region, and then you look at the Philippines is another exceptional country who has been having strategic confrontation in South China Sea vis-a-vis China. And they wish to secure their sovereignty on the claimed territories and the islands in South China Sea. Need to increase both ends to secure the United States commitment for the security guarantee. At the same time, on the daily level, they have to have a capacity for the law enforcement at the sea. And the country who's that providing the capacity is now dominantly by the Japanese Coast Guards, and also utilization of the ODA to provide those equipments like Coast Guard cutters. And the Philippines has been the first country. Japan has been successful in the arms export, starting from the anti-air radar system that is also being supported by the Japanese official security assistance, and also there will be more to come. So there has been the remarkable progress between Japan and the Philippines to connect the level of those kind of security from the low end on the policing function, but also it has some kind of attachment towards how to secure the United States commitment to the region, so that there are more potential to come, including our negotiation with reciprocal access agreements, allowing the Japanese self-defense force to probably rotationally access to the Philippine bases, starting from the like a non-confrontational means like disaster reliefs and humanitarian supports, and those comes first. But it is a kind of a prelude for the Japan to have more access towards the region. And also, I'll stop here in a moment, but there has been the huge progress between the United States and the Philippines over the utilization of the Philippine bases for the temporarily access point for the U.S. bases. It's called the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreements, and Philippines has addressed that there will be 9 Filipino sites to be the place for the United States military to the access. And it's very important because it's basically the maritime domain that you are looking for, but you definitely need to have the land base for the access to smoothly have the resilient types of the access towards the Western Pacific. If the Japan can really speed up the process of the infrastructure development to those sites for the utilization of the U.S. forces in the Philippines, there will be a higher strategic alignment can be made among Japan, U.S., and the Philippines. And those are the stories as of today, but I don't know what's going to happen after January 20th.
No, indeed. Now, meanwhile, I mean, just briefly, still on this, Jesper, I mean, the other characteristic, I mean, we are talking a lot about the defense and security characteristics of ASEAN, but the other characteristic, they are a growth story. I mean, these countries are all growing faster than China. Intra-ASEAN trade is growing faster than trade elsewhere. This is also a huge potential for particularly Japanese companies.
No, and Bill, just to remind ourselves, when you look at just very simple, you look where do profits for listed Japanese companies come from? And you find that about 2/3 come from global, so either from exports or from offshore production. And then if you split it into regions, you actually find that of those 2/3, you find that about 23% of total profits now come from the US. Thank you. 23% come from the People's Republic of China. Thank you. And another 23% come from the ASEAN space. So it's very clear in terms of the economic viability. You've got according to the IMF, you've got almost 90% of the new middle class that's going to be created over the next decade is going to be from the ASEAN countries. So this is, not just for Mr. Yanai from Uniqlo, but for everybody in Japan. This is the new growth market. And ironically, and this is where it gets very interesting, because when we think about the United States and the potential for tariffs, there is an American arrogance that says we are a monopsony. We are basically the primary buyer of everything, and therefore, we can dictate terms.
Yes.
But, as ASEAN, or let's call it the global South, if you want to call it even bigger, these are going to be the primary growth markets in the world, where the purchasing power, where the new middle class of the people is actually going to be built. And to Jimbo Sensei's point, and this is important for Japan, I need to build infrastructure. And if I build this infrastructure with Japanese construction companies, with Japanese engineering companies, this is a huge win-win situation.
Yes, no, absolutely. That's a very, very powerful point. I mean, America does see it that way, and it's not the way the world has evolved.
Yes, and so why isn't Nippon Steel going to merge with Mittal in India?
Yes.
I mean, just to make a point, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's talk briefly about that other country called China, and how it's seen from Tokyo and from economic and political point of view, from within the government and you, Jimbo Sensei, and then we'll of course have to come back to Mr. Trump and the January 20th. But China, how is China being seen, this Japanifying economy, but with a rather American-style security military industrial complex?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Bill. I think there's something very interesting going on in Japan-China relationship. But looking back, several years back, we adopted the national security strategy, defense strategy, decided to double the defense budgets, and calling China as a most significant, strategic challenge to Japan, and align with the United States to how to compete China. And the Taiwan crisis has been identified. And those are the mainstream of how we try to deal with China, including those economic security concerns that I talked about. So in those kind of competitive world, it is very hard to seek for any kind of points in the interface in the diplomacy to seek for a so-called win-win type of solutions. That's why we've been very late in the relaxation of the visa standards comparing with other countries. And the China, pointed out that the so-called their terminologies of contaminated water release from the Fukushima Daiichi plant. And that led to the Chinese decisions to, ban the imports of the fishery products from Japan. So that those kind of spiral went on, including the local security concerns, and so many things have happened in China. But what happened under the Ishiba administration? The first encounter was during the APEC summit in November in Lima. They met together, ladders, in the ceremony style, but confirming that they will seek for the constructive relationship with each other. That led Foreign Minister Iwaya's visit to China, and then surprisingly, they agreed upon the relaxation of the visa standards. So now Japanese citizens are now applicable for the visa waiver status to visit to China. And China actually demanded the same standards of the Japanese, but it's a kind of 1/10 difference of the population pressure to Japan. So, but again, we have pledged the Chinese, especially the wealthy category of the people, can apply for 10 years visa, as opposed to the 1 or 3 years multi-year visa. So that is a significant kind of a signal that we are now encouraging the Chinese to come to Japan and seek for some positive business relationship. And then asking the Foreign Minister Wang Yi to come to Japan to some extent. And then we are also scheduling for Japan, China, Korea trilateral summit meetings sometime in spring. I wonder who in Korea is coming
Yes.
this time. But and then the Nikkei is also suggesting that there are some plans to invite President Xi Jinping to come as a state visit. This is something, very interesting development has been going on, and it is not under my radar. What's been going on at the so sudden period of time? Not under my radar probably means because I'm outside of government, but with some close conversation with foreign defense ministry people, there hasn't been such a kind of strategic kind of accumulation of how to deal with China in past months also. But why this all of a sudden kind of development could happen, and this is predominantly coming from the Beijing side, and why Beijing needs Japan is I think it's a tactical in a way that they wish to have the alignment with Japan in dealing with the United States after
Yeah.
January. And I think that this is something going on, and we are not yet to have the major strategic realignment between two sides. And this is something I think that I observe right at this moment.
I think that must be right, that this is a kind of hedging, or at least a tactical point to say, come on, it's not everything is your way, America, and in anticipation of whatever it is that Trump might do. How do you see this Japan-China relationship, Jesper? And in particular, I mean, in your surprises, you talk about the Trump tariffs maybe bringing an end to the Cold War II, and if you like, a new era with China as a potential surprise if China decides to open up.
No, look, I mean, obviously, everybody has to up their game, and as a result of that, everybody is looking for new options and try to maximize their degrees of freedom. And so I think this rapprochement that Jimbo-san outlined, over the last 6 months between Japan and the People's Republic of China is very, very important. And clearly shows from both sides, and I'm particularly happy about the Japanese side, that they actually want to be in the game, that they're not just going to roll over and say, yes, Mr. Trump, that they are going to develop actual strategic options, in a potential bilateral relationship. And if this China-Japan summit were to happen, that would actually be almost epoch-making, right? In the sense that it would be without Big Brother United States of America there, right? But I wanted to pivot to one potential worry, which is that, if Mr. Trump does indeed go ahead with these massive tariffs against the People's Republic of China, that could actually turn into put Japan's businesses in a very difficult spot. What am I trying to say is that, China has excess capacity in a lot of products, and not just consumer products, but also capital goods. And, if these tariffs in the United States mean that the excess capacity of Chinese capital goods and consumer goods means that these goods are going to be dumped into non-American markets, that could actually turn into a big problem for Japanese. Let me be very specific. And Bill, we've talked about this over the last couple of quarters in this seminar. If in the economic side, the big concern, what is new, is the weakness of Japanese exports. And it's not just car exports, where made in China now obviously is a real choice for the world. And these are perfectly well-designed cars. They've got a good after service, and they are very, very price competitive. That's obviously undermining the Japanese car industry. But if you look at the next layer, capital goods, if you look at leading companies like Fanuc, the robot maker, Murata Seisakushu, the components maker, you actually find that their global exports are actually declining because made in China is now a very viable option. And so if you get the Trump tariffs, right, reducing the ability of China to export to the United States of America, that excess capacity that China has, leading to dumping into other markets. I'm using a big word, dumping, but making the Chinese products even more competitive. That, I think, would be a potential great negative, because it's easy to say, oh, if America gets tough on China, that's good for Japan. Yes, it is in one way, but in the reality of global markets, it actually isn't, because it actually forces more dumping of Chinese excess capacity, which hurts Japanese providers.
Very interesting. I mean, in fact, this helps me bring in a question that's been sitting, a very good question sitting in the Q&A here from Christopher Jones about the Honda, Nissan, and Mitsubishi merger. As he said, do you think there it is, a merger to share IP and development costs on electronic vehicles? Is that really enough given China's EV strength and exports? And seeing what's happening already in Europe, where companies are kind of wobbling in the face of this. How do you, I mean, you talk it is in a positive way that this.
Oh, I mean, look, I try and put a positive spin on everything, but no, but the main point being, it's long overdue. And we talked earlier about the Bank of Japan, too little, too late. I mean, it certainly is too little, too late. I mean, do I actually think that a Nissan-Honda merger is going to create a national champion that's going to be globally competitive? The answer is not really. And the reason is ultimately the reality that neither Nissan nor Honda have the people or the technology to actually do that, right? No. So, I mean, remember, for the merger of the Japanese banks, it took almost, 20 years for them to integrate their HR and their technology functions. So maybe with Nissan and Honda, it's going to take, 7 years, but that's still 7 years during which BYD, the Chinese car company, is going to leapfrog into yet something else. So, I think it's long overdue, a little bit too little, too late. But Jimbo-sensei, I'd love to hear your thoughts on, on the potential for the Nissan Honda thing.
Well, I'm not an expert on this field, but obviously what's been happening in the whole car industry in Japan is the legacy of the old style, and then that there has been delayed all the kind of major kind of transformation from the gasoline to the EV technologies, and I think that to some extent that the European regulation systems to make a carbon neutral and the 2035 40 targets have been slowed down, since that if you try to regulate the things, you will let the Chinese car companies to get in the process. So there has been the gap of the developments of the maturity of the technologies and how the price competitiveness, and you mentioned about the design is now catching up, so that how much you can really reach out to those kind of the timelines of how the market scales and the competitiveness is the issue that we are now considering. It's not about the merger for the the scale itself, but it is about the the speed and expansion of those business strategies.
No, absolutely, and all this allows me also to bring in a comment that another friend said to me about Nissan and Honda coming together. He said, "Hey, if you tie two drowning men together, does it make them better at swimming? And it's not necessarily a solution. And as another questioner here has said, there's also issues about the way in which you can interact between companies. Now, I want to talk a bit about domestic politics in Japan while we've still got time. We have talked a bit about Trump and his tariffs. I mean, the key reason to not spend a lot of more on time on Trump's tariffs is that the main answer is we don't know what he's going to do. And so that, for the audience, is why I'm not exploring what he's going to do, because he might do universal tariffs. He might do tariffs on Denmark to try to get Greenland. He might do all sorts of things. And these are contradictions that need to be resolved. Whereas there is an upper house election in Japan in what is it, July, or there is talk about a double election. You have got a minority government. We've got 5 minutes left. Let's just hear from the two of you about how you see this political scene in Japan playing out, which actually Thomas Glucksmann has asked about in the Q&A here. Are we in an interregnum between periods of LDP dominance, or are we into a new era?
Sensei, dozo.
Since the December 2012, when Abe, confirmed his second term of the prime ministership, he won the general election consecutively, and to consolidate his power base to deliver both domestic and foreign policy in a very effective way. And I think Suga Kishida inherited those, I think, political capitals, even expand those bases. But I think those kind of equation of the Japanese political stability is gone after Ishiba took the office and he lost in the general election. And what he has been achieving so far is to make a major concession on one place to another with the opposition parties to have a partial coalition on the every fronts, which result in a major deliberation of the the spending of the budget sources that will really increase the fiscal kind of volumes in the supplementary budget, and more likely to have for the base budget that we are going to have in the next diet session. And whether that LDP members thinks that they can actually run the election with the Ishiba's leadership is something that is seriously needs to be discussed. If they think that Ishiba should be replaced before the election, and we need some very populist leaders to take over to win the election. But if something happened after the election, there should be some other characters may really lead the process of the coalition government. So it is a matter of timing, a matter of the democracy, how they can really sustain the majority by adding the numbers of the many parties are involved. And this is how the Japanese politics runs as of today. Very different dynamics of what we've seen in the past decade.
Yes, Cole Sensei, what do you think?
It's very interesting, and I agree with much of what Jimbo Sensei said. I want to bring in something that the Americans taught me, which is that we can talk politics and we can talk ideologies, but at the end, follow the money. And the reason the LDP is in disarray, is the reality of former Prime Minister Kishida destroying the way politicians can raise money. Because I can no longer approach religious organizations, and I can no longer hold a political party and collect, some donations from that. And as you know, the political funding issue is still not resolved. And the bill in front of Parliament is being dictated by the opposition parties. And it is quite possible that in the next couple of months, we're going to have the opposition parties actually overruling the LDP's proposal, which means no more corporate contributions to politicians. And if that's the case, the LDP is in real trouble. So it's quite interesting. I think that Mr. Kishida, raised this issue of money and politics, but he didn't have a proposal on how to fix it. And as a result of that, the people are very angry. Is that, yes, there's a problem with money and politics. It lacks transparency in Japan. But how are you going to fix it? But now the LDP has lost control of the narrative. And so it's going to be very interesting, in this new session of parliament that's going to start, in a couple of weeks, whether indeed the opposition parties are united enough to actually have a unified bill. And if that unified bill does prohibit corporate donations, sayonara LDP. It's going to get very interesting.
Well, on that note, Yuran doesn't often hear the phrase sayonara LDP. So let's finish this very rich conversation on that note. Thank you so much, Ken Jimbo and Jesper Koll, for a fantastic conversation. We've covered an enormous range of things, and it's going to be a very interesting year for all sorts of reasons. So see you all back here in 3 months' time. Jesper and I will convene this again, and we'll see how things are going with all of these conversations, in particular that man Trump, and where things are going with the US. But again, Ken Jimbo, thank you for joining us from Singapore. Jesper from Tokyo, and to all of our members for the Asia Society Tokyo and for the Japan Society, thank you very much for joining us, and have a great rest of the day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.